Great. All right, we did it. Wow, thank you all for being here tonight. I'm super stoked. I can't wait to hear everyone read. I can't wait to hear everyone be introduced. I love having everyone have a chance to chat with each other beforehand because really this is a party, so I'm glad we got the party going. And now it is my great pleasure to call things to order. So, poets, writers, friends, family, and members of the Notre Dame community, it is my extreme pleasure to welcome you all to the 2022 Creative Writing MFA Thesis reading. This particular cohort joined us in the first fall after lockdown. Their generosity, care, grace, commitment, and tenacity of vision has been truly exemplary, and it really feels like a win for the entire program to cheer them on tonight. So, all right. Right over there, for getting everyone on track to graduate, and for working, small detail, I know, but as important as the snack table that's waiting in the other room, almost, and for working out the details for tonight's event. And thank you, Callie, for running the Zoom. And thank you also to our sister program, the Department of Art, Architecture, Art History, and Design, for allowing us to utilize their lovely space. If you look this way, you see beautiful landscapes, and if you see that, look that way, you see humane chicken displays. So it's really covering like all of human experience here. Of course, we also must acknowledge that Riley Hall and Notre Dame stand on traditional homelands of several native peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Miami, Peoria, and Potawatomi peoples, and of course, particularly the Pokagon Potawatomi, who have been using this land for education for thousands of years and continue to do so, and continue to support children and learning through the whole region. So, thank you for everything that tribe is doing for everyone in our region. Our program for tonight includes brief encouraging remarks from me, the outgoing director of creative writing, I should say, and then an alphabetical performance, a salute to the alphabet, starring our graduates, each introduced by their thesis director. And then I will take the stage again to announce 2 awards, and then we will repair across the hall to the snack tables to congratulate each other. And now for the brief encouraging remarks. I swear they're brief. When he was a spry but advancingly syphilitic 40-year-old. I tried to be honest and he said it was fine. When he was a spry advancingly syphilitic 40-year-old Charles Baudelaire. Charles Baudelaire, who had outraged the literary world and polite society with his Flowers of Evil just a few years previously, and living off his mother, and devoted to an almost deranged commitment to beauty, that Charles Baudelaire thought it was about time that he was elected to the Académie Française, that most venerable collection of mostly elderly French literary worthies. This somewhat wise and enfant terrible went around, we're talking about Baudelaire here, taking tea with everybody and shaking hands and making his case, having no idea how far from likely to succeed his case actually was. He thought he was doing great. One of the authors he was trying to impress, Sambeau, published in the actual newspaper of the day. I don't know if this was in his own little column, Monday Chats, or not, this guy Sambeau. But in the actual newspaper, he published a diss track dissing Baudelaire and telling this whole story. And here's what Sambeau wrote. He wrote, "People wondered if by standing, Baudelaire wanted to play a trick on the Academy. More than one member of the Academy had to be taught how to spell Monsieur Baudelaire's name because he was completely unaware of his existence. It is not as easy as one would think to prove to some academicians who are politicians and statesmen. There are some poems in the Fleur de Mal which are truly remarkable for their inspiration and their art, or to explain to them that among the author's little prose poems, there are jewels. And that in short," and here's the part I really like, because this is like, seems like it's praising him, but actually obviously it's completely damning him. "And in short, Monsieur Baudelaire has found the means of building himself at the end of a peninsula, which is said to be uninhabitable, and beyond the bounds of known romanticism, a bizarre kiosk He's talking about his writing now. His writing is a bizarre kiosk, very ornate, very overdone, but elegant and mysterious. A kiosk in which one grows drunk on abominable drugs in cups of exquisite porcelain. I think you see where we're going. This singular kiosk, made of marquetry, of a deliberate and composite originality, which for some time has drawn people's eyes to the furthermost extremity of this romantic Kamchatka, this is what I call the Baudelaire folly. The author is content to have done something impossible in a place no one thought that anyone could go. Imagine putting somebody down by saying they are content to have done something impossible in a place no one thought that anyone could go. Poets and writers, I am here to tell you that like all the great literary diss tracks, this snooty put down is pretty much entirely on the money. Baudelaire did build a vision of art that was like a bizarre kiosk on the farthest peninsula of Siberian Russia, which to these Parisian fancy pantses might as well have been outer space. He did pour the poison of art into the most delightful of cups and bid everyone sip. Yes, to both some both directly, he did something impossible in the place where no one had thought anyone could go. This could be the metaphor for the individual artist who pursues his vision of art no matter what, even to the farthest reaches, and builds a quirky kiosk there, like an arty sunglass hut, a way station where the next artist can come, rest, and be changed. But, of course, it could also be an emblem for our starry, committed, various, eclectic, quirky little MFA program that could, having rooted ourselves in a location far beyond what most people have thought to go to, we have done the impossible, which is to have flourished together, collectively and generously, with our variously lovely and uncanny blooms. After all, it does take bone meal and arsenic to make the brightest roses bloom. You five. 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm always with 5. You five, our phalanx. I bid you now to rise, metaphorically, from our, but if you are able to rise, also rise, in the sky, levitate. I bid you now to rise from our bizarre kiosk, like a rose, or like a rocket ship, or like an uncanny swarm of musical, indefatigable, and ornately attired wasps, who themselves rise on the strength of their own urgencies, be they political, formal, or aesthetic, and by turns, and by preference, natural and unnatural, philosophical or optimistic, fly in a true way in your various directions, and plot your trajectories by the stars. And I mean that quite sincerely. And without further ado, first is Mary Dwyer, and I assumed it would be introduced by Armando. Thank you.
Good evening. It is with great pleasure, and indeed honor, that I introduce to you Mary Dwyer, whom I taught in 2 workshops, whose thesis I directed, and who served as my poetry assistant in the Notre Dame Review these past 2 years. From her very first admission in the grad workshop of fall 2020, I could easily tell that Mary had a singular talent for poetry of formal control combined with a bold imagination. Indeed, Mary's poems are luminously agonistic, vigorously textured, and tautly lyrical, where stanza by stanza, line by line, complex ideas and emotions, whether heart-rending or sublime, commune in beatific visions of our fragile humanness. I wish to emphasize to all of you how blessed I feel to have had this formidable poet as my student, whose work I have steadfastly admired and whose editorial eye I have invariably trusted. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Orlando. And I would just like to give a brief thanks, first starting with you, Orlando. because I don't think that I had a really great grip on form until I started with working with you. And you've truly helped me to transform language and memory through the imagination in that way. I would also like to thank Joel and Johannes, both of whom have read my thesis and have given me a lot of great and encouraging feedback along the way. My peers in workshop, who have been such a super supportive community, and just my peers in the program in general. And of course, Paul, for doing everything that you do. It's pretty amazing to have you. Yeah, this is an opportunity that I never thought I would have. So without further ado, I'll get started. My first poem is called Nursing Brother in the Garden off the Garden State Parkway. The steelyard of his back aching, I sit on the seed bags and daub a brick abruptly, mired on my king's bench of sorrow. Dope-dealing mutterer in need of injury law representation. Call Binder and Binder, call the hammer, call the smokestacks above Neptune Auto Repair. Puff into this tube and your fitness to drive will be assessed, denied. The dust from our sacks all over this deck. Mother's flowers winking in late noon, rubles pouncing at butterflies, one little feline prince who cannot disappoint. Her garden, the ash of our father neat in a chalice among cheap china. We stew, fish flies perched on the inlet, between knees and bicycles, between sharks and left hooks. Oh brother, backbone of my life, curved and carotid, contused and numbed with the neat stomp of a Sackler wing-tipped dress shoe. I blow into your ventricles and the fluffs of your gills ripple, a tender something beneath to kiss. Red sky, blue sky, bridge horn, big debt, we hang and hang in the balance. Escaping Narcissa's complex. On the tile floor of her crusted palace, I gather the cry of his fall, and he shrivels, weightless, to a skin-withered, pinch-beaked egg. Papa, no, I say, and house-coated Narcissa falsely tears, preening her opal glass. I shuck the husks of May and burn them, shrieking spit on the campfire. She stuffs cabinets with pills and legerdemain for a saccharine soup to nullify his kingly fist, this Lady Macbeth of Long Island, beaten with bottles and belt loops and cabbage heads, ever bleeding old wounds from a bad pastiche. Pater, patrum, patrice, who cut a papal throne of your toilet bowl, built your windowless outhouse of smoke. I want to don the golden dress. I want to court my prince of thieves. For you, I drain the moats with pudge prints of blood, scour crisp ash for your boyhood. For years, I gauzed up all her spite. Now, my ghost, it is your turn. Narcissa in the garden. She flexes the sting of her backhoe and chips the parapet to shrapnelled sadness. It's dark and her creaking knees swallow the pus of their cysts. Sit, I want to say through the glass. The yard of sand is weeding over and she has been at it for too long. My garden, my garden. The heads of our fathers keep popping up, spitting threats like skunk cabbage. Her torn pantyhose and corn toes, her perfume and pins and tired carpet coat. Mother, I cry as she hustles to work in the damp of her fever. I rock in the curled jungle of wallpaper, smoke-stained with the scent of him, his true blue smokes and his hands resting on the kitchen stool, clutching a bud, his free knee an offering. I want us to have a hen in the oven for her return, but this is a different house, and we are already gone. This is called Brother as Telemachus, Sister Attending, and it's an erasure of James Joyce's Ulysses, chapter 1. Ungirdled, thrice gurgling in dactyls, he crumpled grave clothes, a jagged bowl curling to vermin. His swine, beastly cerebral, picks buttercups round dim harp strings, crying chewer of cored apple, omnipotent. Brush the barbicans, a grub bless us. When I makes tea, I makes loaf untold toadstool. He bog swamps, flesh, a milk can shilling, a library of loose pockets eaten on ghost tongue. Said Mercury's bird-sweet joiner, I thumb the rent bread, Roman tobacco 9 days upspilling breastbone. He drew my rib of pennies, a bull smile called home again. Brother, her first desire, or love in a mist. Also called devil in a bush, my love rides, a remarkable horned fruit with blue gold carpels. Short-legged, I trotted after his suit, my knight with thicker hair and shining greaves. I trudged and I trudged, touting the tapestries of paradise, heavy beneath a trundled diadem, me, the midget squire of a plush quarry, whistling his tune of idleness. I stumped on with my little wound blooming, my pudge hands shod with gauze. Brother, we won't get far with our plunder, and you've left the door ajar. Oh, noon Goliath, diabetic lone star, distant gem of my rare life, I always bear the cup as you count your nectars, as you fade from the wheel of whispered creeds, and the garden closes its July palms, crested sorrows spawning at the gate. And this is from the same series. It's called Brother in the Labyrinth. He carries a rough garnet through the village, stopping only to shuck clams and diddle a little tune. Dingbat, ragamuffin, fetid whorehound. Dusking to his song, I squeak a crisp walk behind, lugging my bags and my pennyworts, band-aided bubs achafe neath my tunic. He's abandoned his trestle, left it to the drummer, whose coin box sips in the air and starves. I hobble like a court dwarf after a syphilitic king, robed in my small dignity. Brother, I cry, but he absconds with the stone, this heart of our masters, to pawn it for a fix. I fake all the smoothness and drip sweet lime in the merchants' mouths. Tell me, which way did he limp? I harry a bus driver who bluffs, and I bitch, where do you get off? The fistula of him in my side bleeds no more, but it's an awful mess. Men stick their knucks clear through it and laugh. What a party trick. This is called As Aging Flesh She Stews. Am I a silkworm, flea-born as an errant knight? My beads drip hemming stones in the rafters, and my love grows bored at last of my balled-up fits, my eye rolls of thunder. They cease to stun, for I'm a limp-bagged windsock, a grocery clerk shrunken, papped, and sailing at the whims of kindling. What are these nipple puckers and stippled sags to me, but extra grounds for the pot? Grounds for your garden, grounds for dismissal, the folding over of flesh, a cerebral sacking of my guts. Do I please, and do I dare, and do I pluck up my oaten reeds to pipe a pace on the spume of your far-off gaze? Cruel cuckolding of this night. The dreary stars lie on their bellies for swift entry of the sun as my back turns. I have the means to snuff them out with my good eye, but meant I once to be a better lover than that. Speech to the men who have robbed her, and this is an erasure of James Joyce's Ulysses chapter 2. And you, final Pyrrhus of a shoulder sweetened with chosen shepherd's sin, here lies Caesar, the riddle buckled all as a throat broke asunder, showing a snail's bed, blind and crooked futility. I race mother's wedded ashes in ghost glasses, in mummery. Can you, weak tyrants, stick the laggard sunshine of apostles in the savings box of a soiled Englishman's mouth? Empty, borrowed shilling. Can you feel that? The tartan be hung with spindle sons, Dublin horses vying the joust of jockeyed embargo? Mark harlot silk and whistle a faithless wife if you can crack that gate. I hope each breath has you dragging a chain of laughter-stamped coins. And this is my last poem. It's called The Docent After Work, and it was a response to a piece of art that's the altar frontal at Avia. Fizz clinks in on all sides of a highball glass as I steep here a sober bitter. My new lover, well-fed and shaved and nervous, spins out on toe tip, an ache of excess bilirubin. At such moments, I despise hairlessness. Things are raking vaseward. This still life sits on a shelf, horns like heady kneecaps and the oblong stone atop Maria's head. A Semitic moon sits on a cistern and simmers the fate of his mystery child, Mum's feet cloaked as they must be in worry folds, steepled into rose puckers at her brow. And I find my peepholes are stuffed with loose strife. My eyelids bend to the wheel, flamed, two jaundiced puffs, breathing blobfish, combustible. Lash line aches right by the ball, a lump in there, a bee trying to hatch. Oh, little eggy wiggle, you itch, come out now. Beneath it all, a seed of rose hibiscus waits for the mucus to dissolve and coronas to burn. Little bread and butterflies kiss the tulips, and the sun is like a toy balloon. One day, I'll be the veteran of paradise. One day, I'll be the bard who can't sleep and haunts the manger. Thank you.
Okay, friends, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to the poet Jillian Phanton, incipient master of fine arts. Jillian's poetry is radical and actually radial in its attention, modeling the true, radiant 360 degrees of possibility which it is given to us humanoids to contemplate as we drift around the milk bath on our rock. Their thesis, The Donut World, trains an uproarious, cartoonish chorus through a toric-shaped universe of sensation and micro-adventure. The work is rambunctious and lively, yet disciplined and formally controlled, studied with celebrity life forms, from Val Kilmer to Juan Jotters, and exploring thematics of gender, embodiment, plurality, and power. Jillian's sense of possibility moves us beyond the aggressively, tautologically mundane world with which we are mostly forced to contend, and deposits us in another world, spongiform, aberrant, slippery, sticky, tonic, holy, and donut-shaped. Life here is eventful and eventual, and it careens. Importantly, this world topologized in Jillian's thesis is not just an aesthetic vision, but a political one. The donut world instantiates a dynamic, vivid society where damage is distant, sensuality is a self-replenishing resource, and possibility is prioritized rather than obscured. Please welcome Jillian Phanton.
Thank you so much, Joel. That was such a generous introduction. Am I good to stand in front?
It's really dark.
It's really dark? I'll move to the back.
I'm so
I'm
sorry.
not a huge podium user, but this will be fun. Okay, awesome. Hi, okay, so thank you so much, Joel. Thank you so much for everything. You've advised me through this mad little confection so much. And thank you especially for your poem, Develop Nation, which the boy soprano into the donut world initiated this entire planetary body. I also wish to echo Joel's remarks at the beginning that I conceived, crafted, curated, and revised my manuscripts, and I've done so much work on the lands of Indigenous nations. And I very much appreciate the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi for accepting a donation symbolic of my time spent on their land in the past 2 years, and I urge everyone to do the same. Thank you to all of my peers who workshop these pieces, to my professors and workshop leaders, to my roommate who's heard it all and seen it all, to my wonderful students. I see a couple of you in the audience. I love you so very much. To the students who cannot be with us here today, down in Westville, who have been very eagerly awaiting the Donut World and keep asking me when it will be published.
All right.
I don't know. I know better than you. And I also wish to just name my special thanks to my loved ones who are watching remotely or watching later. Robin, Joseph, David, Maya, Audrey, Gabby, Joy, Abigail, Jamie, and my cat, Ziggy. So in the words of the 21st century philosopher and poet Pitbull, I can't promise tomorrow, but I promise tonight. I will start by reading a few selections from the Donut World, and then I will be reading a bit from a new project. As a note, these Donut World selections do contain some censorship by a being called the Pussy Bow, which is a fascist fashion garment. So for those censored words, I will maintain silence by mouthing the words, but not interrupting the flow of the reading. And the first poem I will read was created in ekphrastic collaboration with mixed media artist Kate Luther. This piece was called Lois Rogers, and the poem is called Rococo Puffs. Priestess Chemise worships the dirt cake in splot smock. Versailles, Versailles. She white beetle ready whips the 8-track, smashed raspberry heart like a cervix. She's a wandering uterus in a Barbara Loden baby doll. Pleaser platforms pucker and pop rock shagwell storm drains. Buttons acrylic squish, magenta snot plugs, ring poppers laminate her wine tooth. Nightgowns drumstick, fried everlasting. A birthday extract gilded in Charleston pie. She is poached porree. The next piece is called Portrait of the Artist as a Clown, which is after a self-portrait of the same name by the artist Walt Kuhn. I'm carrying candy-striped canvas, a cannoli cream circus. The tree twists round my chalked neck. Don't forget the conviction. Austin Powers, blue velvet teeth, Dare Invisalign. Exercise swing is in gender alchemy, baby. Make man fearing not Dior foundation, and stitch pre-sequin from herringbone. I'm carrying and carrying on in hunky-dory huckle-babbles. Can dogs with butterfly ears still be dogs? Gouache eyebrows still be eyebrows? Pierrot still be little Peter? My little Peter with the big blue eyes? Little Peter always making your mother laugh even though your soul weighs old as Noah's pudding? I'm carrying, dragging this circus, dragging mother's circus and mother's circus animals, the pink and white frosted ones, mother's frosted carousel horses as two hands sprinkle crunch. When people fall asleep, do paintings lose their meaning? And this piece, which is the last from the Donut World, was written in very tense meditation following a watch of Vincent Gallo's Buffalo 66 and wanting better for Christina Ricci, as we all should want better for Christina Ricci. So this is Portrait of the Artist as the Denny's Witch. I'm painting my nails with pistachio crumbles. It's the closest to ice blue eye glitter, the closest to Christina Ricci on tap, in tap class, in bowling alleys, in jump, click, and scissor steps. Some says he's moon age night dreaming. That's just asleep. I'm painting a motel slip left behind, bathroom carpet imaginary. I'm painting help me love, mini disc areolas and gerbil pouch jaw, eyelashes that curl the wrong way, uppercut dilated pupils, moon pie child, dance shoes, chassé, payphone, cardigan chills. I'm painting you in well-fitting sports bras and a black puffer jacket, drinking oat milk hot chocolate with smashed avocado lips. I'm painting the new menu. Please, eat. My heart is a Loft House cookie. And teach me to crater funk waltz, moonchild in a milk white gown. My nails are dry, but I'm still painting the fluttony and the pudding crust. My pudding crust moon pie child ellipsis orbiting in glastic beads. I'm painting and she's sucking Sisyphus. That is his jawbreaker. You think it keeps getting smaller and smaller, but why would it and how could it? And the happiness is in the fucking. I have cider and witnesses who claim that's a lie. So that was the last of the Donut World, and I will end my reading with a sequence featured within a new collection called Young Velvet Porcelain Boy from a Madonna song. It deals with a lot of themes of classical masculinity, brevity, youth and laziness, something I'm working on called Jackass Poetics, like Steve-O Jackass Poetics, and the devouring of bodies in the name of love, whatever that may be. So this last sequence is entitled Candies, a Dead Letter Anti-Archive. And it's a narrative-adjacent sequence of 9 lyrics from erasure I've performed on 27 sources of 20th century love songs and historical love letters. These sources include a letter between a soldier who died in battle to another man back home, correspondence between Vita Sackville West and Virginia Woolf, and songs that are just my favorites, like Queen's Good Old Fashioned Lover Boy, Fleetwood Mac's Seven Wonders, and David Bowie's As the World Falls Down. And the impetus for this sequence comes from my time spent with Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener and his letters to Nathaniel Hawthorne. So I will open the sequence with the epigraph, which is from Bartleby. From Bartleby the Scrivener. Will you or will you not quit me? I now demanded in a sudden passion, advancing close to him. I would prefer not to quit you, Bartleby replied, gently emphasizing the not. Young. My hands rhyme our rumpled lives, another night, starved paradise. Your arms hold this nothing dream together. Velvet. Awake, awake, my sacred curve, my most beautiful little beginning. I feel I can breathe you completely. Oh, I feel. And when I miss you, lover boy, I will taste you and love you right. Porcelain. My all seems a circle, bound in the exultant unusual of years ago, where you burst into my arms and smiling tell me you love me already. Boy. Alike and lucky, my life the object of your guilt, your gray and your now, we midnight and we flicker to a close. Young velvet. Myself, a press, a bluely eternal in manifold distress and dry heat, reduced to the sensible reality, this squeal you can't stand, that empty everything that fits the groove of clear daylight and a waiting boy. Porcelain boy. This prayer is a child wandering full of fancy, scampering with violet faith and a shy song. I should be content to listen. But you are all the world, the morning, the day, the night, that never-ending wish to live. Velvet porcelain. I occur like a strip of spine, a rubber mouth, a morning when I should be in church. I love, I mix, I whore, and you watch this new paragraph fish for dough, for the unpromising exquisite, for the pale thrill gone gold between the pain. Velvet boy. My grief speaks through everything, demands that I should meet these days with doubt, walk bearing what we will lose of youth. Darling, you and I, like the vague, dream our moment again and again. Forget the pendulum. Be in love again. And finally, young boy. Dear moment, I find no better epithet than the real, the boy, crimson cool and nearer than the gods. I've always doubted the permanence of place, but you live the wonder, touch my hand and reach me. You smile, and I pray to live that beauty. Thank you.
I'm very happy to introduce my MSU, whose fiction I've had the great pleasure of reading these last 2 years for the funhouse perspectives they bring, which always lead readers to view the world anew, or at least from an angle they haven't experienced before. Her stories are full of a kind of mundane wonder, if I can use an oxymoron like that to describe it, because in Naema's world, a ghost can emerge like a genie from an aerosol can of furniture polish. A neighbor might ask you to bury him so he can lie dormant like a cicada in the dirt of his yard. Or you might find a child-sized bat hanging upside down in the closet of your hotel room. But do the characters who encounter events like this freak out? No, for in Naema's stories, things like human bats or jobs writing articles for bots are just part of everyday life. So if you were in one of her stories, you'd simply continue to polish the furniture while conversing with the ghost about jealousies and lost loves. You'd feed that bat bed bugs out of the mattress they infest. Or like one woman who's busy using a drain pipe to amplify whale sounds when an astronaut crash lands in her yard, you'd think, I don't have time for this nonsense. I could just shoot him. This is Arizona, after all. Whether they are like one old woman who has to rearrange her bones every morning to confirm her presence in the world, or another who carries inside her a fetus that is like a blueprint of her insides, Naema's characters are like poker players who haven't been dealt the cards they had hoped for. But like characters in a Beckett play, they go on, playing the cards life has dealt them, rather than wishing for different cards. That is, these stories are never just whimsical, since they carry within their shocking turns human cicadas, rearrangeable bones, mold-covered houses, and other improbable, if wholly believable phenomena, a gravity that makes us sigh in recognition at the absurdity that lies within the pathos of us poor, ever-striving, ever-failing humans. Unsurprisingly, Naema's fiction has already begun to appear in premier literary magazines such as the Minnesota Review, and she's been shortlisted for a number of prizes, such as the Pushcart Prize for Best Fiction. We're lucky to hear a sample of her writing tonight, and I give you Naema Meshu.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that introduction. That's so kind. I guess before I start reading, I want to take a moment to do a couple of thank yous too. So first to Steve for all of your feedback and support throughout the thesis process and even before in workshop. It's been just incredibly helpful. And thank you to the other professors I had in workshop, Azreen, Roy, and Dion, for just your support in those classes and your feedback there. And then thank you to my fellow writers in workshop and outside of workshop. It's been great to be part of this community with you all, and it's been incredible. You've all helped me grow so much as a writer during my 2 years here. And last but not least, I also wanted to thank my friends and family and my partner for supporting me during the process of writing this thesis. Some of you are watching on Zoom. Hi Mom, hi Dad. And I'm excited to get to show you the work that I've been working on. And I'm gonna, before I dive into the actual reading, I wanted to provide some context for what I'm reading. So I'm reading from a project called Infestations, which is someday going to be a full novel of linked stories, but which I presented in my thesis as a tetraptych. I knew I was gonna mess that up, a tetraptych. So 4 connected stories following a girl named Greta, so from girlhood to early adulthood. And they contain infestations, both literal and metaphorical. And I'll be reading from the first story called Bad Copy, starting about halfway through the story and then reading right up until its last scene. And all you need to know for this excerpt is that Greta and her mother have recently moved to the middle of the country from its eastern coast. And because Greta's father died when she was a baby and her mother is usually during the day working as a postal delivery worker, Greta's often left alone, and so she starts befriending her neighbor who is digging a large hole in the shared backyard behind this row of rundown apartments that she lives in for an undisclosed reason. And that's all I've got in the way of introduction, so I'll just go ahead and dive into the middle of Bad Copy. There were still 3 weeks left until the start of first grade, and the days were long. Greta's mother went to work in the mid-morning once they had eaten breakfast together, and she had prepared Greta's lunch sandwich and stowed it in the fridge. Greta was left with a coloring book, a handful of children's books, and a stack of VHSs her mother had copied cartoons onto just before they had moved. She was almost finished with the coloring book despite deliberately shading at a glacial pace, knew the words of the books by heart though she could not yet read, and had seen the cartoons backwards and forwards, playing them through and then rewinding them in slow motion. The most interesting thing about the cartoons were that they were not the only thing her mother had copied onto the VHSs. Occasionally, there were brief interludes where the anthropomorphized forest creatures were replaced by people, real, not drawn, who talked seriously in a language she could not understand, which she knew instinctively was her mother's. The interludes only lasted for a couple of seconds, often not long enough to gain any context. In one of them, Greta had heard a man say something that sounded like the way her mother said, "I'm going to need you to listen closely," in English, with the same rise and fall of her tone, and perceived a brief swelling in her chest that felt like understanding. Sometimes she fast-forwarded through the cartoons and watched only what she had begun to think of as the real parts, testing the words in her mouth like lozenges. Soon, though, even this was not enough. Greta missed her grandmother, who had taken care of her during breaks while her mother worked. She missed her kindergarten friend, especially now that even the virus they had shared was long gone. She filled each morning by coloring with slow, careful strokes, then dutifully flipping through a book, and then fast-forwarding through one of the cartoons to the real parts, unsuccessfully chasing the thrill of comprehension. After lunch, she spent a couple of hours trying to catch glimpses of the cockroaches. She looked in and under the bathroom sink cabinet, under the stove and the fridge, behind the freestanding trash can, and in the cabinets under and beside the kitchen sink, sliding a ruler into cracks and corners to try to wake them, echoing her mother. When she succeeded, she watched them scuttle across the floor, connecting splotches on the linoleum with their paths. Sometimes she lay flat on the ground so that they were almost eye level, politely ignoring the musty odor of their gathering places and simply watching. When one crawled on her, she waited until it was finished exploring and left again. There was no point in speaking, no expectation that either side should understand the other's language. Eventually, the cockroaches would retreat to their hiding places to wait until nightfall, and Greta would busy herself with cleaning what she could of their traces: the small peppercorn feces, the beige paper-thin shed skins, and, with a heavy heart, the cockroaches killed by the bait stations her mother had set up. She collected the supine bodies lying motionless near the stations, and then carefully plucked the corpses her mother had crushed during the previous day's tap dance out of the trash can where she had tossed them, and swept everyone into a blue dustpan. The burial was swift, a small, shallow hole dug with her fingers near the tree line, joining the graves from previous days, verging on a constellation. Afterwards, she postponed her return to the apartment. The shadows of the trees were pointing at her back stoop by then. It would not be time to meet the pale neighbor until the shadows were pointing at his. She had decided after their first meeting that he was not a stranger anymore, but she had not told her mother about him. She decided she would if her mother was ever home to receive her invitation to join them, if her mother ever stopped leaving her alone. Greta passed the time walking along the road past the gravel parking lot. There was no sidewalk, only more yellowed grass, and she walked up and down the stretch parallel to the apartment building, as close to the street as she dared, waiting for the rush of air that accompanied a car driving by, counting how many silver and black and blue and red ones there were before she forgot where she was and had to start over. By the time the pale neighbor whistled for her, she was parched and drenched in sweat. She returned to the apartment, took her glass out of the fridge, drank until it was empty, and went out the back door. The pale neighbor only dug a couple of shovelfuls every day, carefully, in a way that reminded Greta of the way she ate ice cream when her mother allowed it. She watched him dig from her back stoop, and then he sat down on his, the tree's shadows straining toward his feet. Occasionally, he brought canned peaches, a small, gleaming can for each of them, with a pull tab she never managed to open herself. He would let her try, before opening it and handing it back to her, juice oozing past the rim, with a whistle like the wordless version of ta-da. They ate quietly, and on the days when the silence stretched past the last peach, Greta took a few of the cicada shells he had lined up on the edge of the bottom stair and played with them, staging epic battles. They were perfect figurines, prehistoric looking, like something out of a dream, frozen in mid-action so their next move was easy to intuit, and split down the center of their backs so she only had to look at their hollow insides to remind herself she was in control. Once she looked up mid-game and noticed he had arranged more of them on the horizontal sill where the two panes of his window met, stop-motion shells perpetually marching nowhere. More often than not, the pale neighbor was in the mood to talk, and what he talked about were cicadas. The cicada he introduced her to at their first meeting, long disappeared now, had only slept underground for about 2 years before coming to the surface, some of its kind emerging every year. But his favorites were the kinds who slept for many years before emerging, some for 13, some even for 17. They stayed underground for much longer than Greta had been alive, and for longer than their predators lived. When they did emerge, there were so many that predators couldn't possibly eat them all. These broods survived through withholding and then overwhelming, a drought and then a flood. The male cicadas, the pale neighbor told her, were the ones who sang to attract females. Their chests were mostly hollow to help them project their song into the air. In 2 years, he told her, a smile pulling at the corners of his mouth, the entire area would be covered with small, hollow-chested men. What do the women do? Greta asked on one such afternoon. They're quieter, the neighbor said. They flick their wings to call the men to them or warn them off. When they lay eggs, they're as tiny as kernels of rice, and when those eggs hatch, the nymphs burrow into the ground for their long sleep. Greta pictured swarms of miniature hollow-chested men with bulging eyes. Her father's chest, she knew, hadn't been hollow, having been filled by his big heart. And she had never known her mother to merely rustle her limbs. If anything, she was the one who called, whose chest seemed to hollow out when she was implementing her will. She wasn't, as far as Greta had observed in her 6 years of life, interested in calling any men to her, since no men had arrived, and Greta and her mother had remained alone. On a different afternoon, the pale neighbor told her about the cicada's long sleep, which wasn't really a sleep at all. He told her the nymphs were awake underground, tunneling, suckling on tree and plant roots, and molting from one phase to the next, growing bigger among their brethren until it was time to emerge and morph into their final form. We call it a sleep because we can't see them, he said, scratching thoughtfully under his baseball cap, when actually they're down there changing, waiting until the time is right. They know better than we do that there's no use coming out until they're good and ready. When they were good and ready, he told her the next day, their mating song was unique to their species, so that when several species left their underworld at the same time, the women could recognize their own. Their favorite song is the song of their kind and only their kind, their song of themselves, he said, adding that once, many years ago and over many years, a species had been forced to change their song because it was too close to that of their neighbors. A bad copy, Greta murmured, tracing a toe in the dirt. The pale neighbor stood up, holding the peach cans. One of them dripped lazily onto a cicada shell, shifting it. A bad copy that is a copy no longer. See you tomorrow, kid. Shortly before the end of the summer, Greta dreamed of an evening pulsing with cicada song. She was outside on the back stoop, the pale neighbor nowhere to be found, and she was looking at a heart, red, glistening, contracting and expanding in the dirt in time to the song. At first, Greta thought it was the heart of her unborn uncle until she remembered her mother's mistake. And it was much too large to be the heart of her uncle. It was the heart of her father, escaped from his chest, which must now be hollow, to visit her at the apartment her mother kept making lonelier. Before she could decide what to do with the heart, 5 cicadas plucked it up, hoisted it onto their backs, and carried it through the dirt, silently. Women, then. She followed their progress, first with her eyes, and when they had covered some ground, with her feet. At long last, they reached a circle of trees she hadn't known existed beyond the trees lining the edge of the property. There, the cicadas gathered, hundreds of them, men and women, on the ground, on the trees, crawling over her bare feet and her father's heart. She knew they were the kind that had lived far longer than her, and closed her eyes to try to discern the male song from the female clicks, but the sound was too deafening, the song was too deafening. Its buzzing ebbed and flowed. Greta thought her eardrums would burst. When she opened her eyes again, her father's heart was gone. The blood-red eyes of the cicadas were wide open. Her eyes were wide open. She took them in, and the sound swallowed her up. When Greta awoke, the sound was still there. She slid out of bed and tiptoed to the window. The yard looked unremarkable in the stoop light the pale neighbor always left on. No cicada swarm and no disembodied heart. Then her eyes moved to the trees. Hanging from a branch of the tallest tree, the one whose shadow had been yearning for the pale neighbor's feet, was a large bat, shadowy, cocooned in its wings, and easily as tall as her. Greta was halfway across the yard before she realized she had forgotten her sandals. The dry grass pricked her feet and reminded her that she was afraid. She faltered and lifted her feet in place, rubbing them one after the other. The air smelled of wet dirt. The pit beside her was deep enough to attempt an echo. The piles of excavated dirt towered. The cicadas stopped singing, and the bat unfurled its wings, and Greta ran toward the tallest tree, where it stuck in her throat, and by the time she reached it, the bat was gone, not to be seen again for many years. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay.
Reading Philip Spinella's work, I'm reminded how in Japan, the act of creating a ceramic object like a saucer or a teapot is often considered an act of philosophy. The philosophy is in the mental stillness one must have, the act of being in balance with the motion of the potter's wheel, as well as the material being worked. But most of all, it's in the quiet one-to-one relationship that artists have by being in both the immediate presence of the materials they are working and the tradition of other artists at their wheels that stretches back centuries. Maybe Philip will come up here and say, nah, I don't work that way at all. Right with. Black Sabbath blasting away. There's many roads to Nirvana, right? But that's the sense I get when reading his work, the engagement of a mind and an eye and a hand that puts down on paper one beguiling sentence, then another, as the thought life he creates unfolds. I especially admire the thought life that is at the heart of the novel he began while here at Notre Dame, Eugenie Beneath the Verticals. As the narrator, who is mourning the death of his fiancée, moves from the ravines, outcroppings, and other wild places of Central Park to the 16th century bridges of Florence, to the catacombs of Paris and back, a geography of the mind emerges, engaged as it is with the peoples, places, and especially works of art before him. But through these same people, places, and works of human creation, we feel a connection to the deep river of those who have gone before us, have run their hands over the smooth stones of a fabulously ornate and historical bridge built in 1177, destroyed by flood in 1269, rebuilt, destroyed, and rebuilt again in 1557, 1569, and 1944. This last destruction by the retreating German army in an effort, we're told, that did not slow the end of the war by 5 minutes. Ponte Nuevo is the unironic name of the bridge, New Bridge, which, as the narrator understands, is continually being remade in the minds of its users, just as we might become co-authors of a Renaissance painting by feeling a pang of recognition in the suffering of the martyr depicted, as well as the cruelty of the one wielding the lash, and the artist struggling to translate into oil whatever it is that makes people people. Sitting beneath the largest dome ever made of bricks, the massive dome over the Cathedral of Florence, the narrator considers how, with the knowledge of physics needed to construct such a dome several hundred years in the future, its construction was an act of faith, as was the act of sitting beneath it. When returning from a party in the catacombs of Paris, he considers how, even if there was no Eurydice in this story, there was something to be said for going underneath the earth and coming back to tell the tale. For like the narrator, we readers feel by the end of the novel that all of the stories that make us human exist in a state of resonance. Philip came to us with degrees in English, philosophy, and law, and as he puts it, a misspent youth working as a lawyer. For his art, I'll quote a description he himself employs. The documents speak for themselves.
Steve, thank you so much. And for the last 2 years, you've been so encouraging. And for someone who came in with kind of a little to no practice, kind of established writing practice, that encouragement has meant the world to me. I'll hop right in. I'm glad that you mentioned all the kind of art and sculpture stuff, because I'm not doing any of that. You've given just a perfect rundown of what I'm going for there if I don't achieve it, but that's a perfect, my intent is right what you said. But this time you mentioned the narrator, right? And so the narrator's fiance's death in a car crash, which is kind of the inciting event for this piece. The fiance is addressed as you throughout the text occasionally, floats in and out of the text. But at the end of the text, the narrator returns to New York. He's at a bar and talking to a commuter waiting for the train. The narrator has, occasionally throughout the text, the urge to lie to people, and this kind of urge overtakes him in this scene. And he proceeds to invent a wife and a children and a happy family, etc. And the text here, for the first time, is interrupted by the voice of the fiance, and so that's what I'm going to read here. Please, love, stop for a moment, stop and listen. Do you hear yourself? 2 kids, married, happily? Would that it were. I sympathize, I do, that you would harbor these fantasies in your mind, in your imagination, the port of last resort. But to weave aloud a little web of delusion, to fabricate a fantasy to a stranger, it's too much. But when were you ever not? I've sat idly by and watched it all unfold. In your visions, I'll have you know, that was not me there with you haunting, that was your mind. You, not me. But when was it ever not, really? For what it's worth, no, I do not begrudge you it. I've seen them already, known them all. I don't begrudge you any of it, or anything that will come. She was, I can see, a respite, and my love, you need to rest. What does anger me though, and this I know, you know would make my anger bloom. What angers me is this, so much of us, of me, of what I taught you, what I learned, what I felt, what I knew, what I understood of you and you of me. You put it all in the mouths of others, others' voices, others' lives. And where's mine now? You want it for yourself. You want to live it for you and only you, locked away, ageless in the attic in your mind. Where am I really and truly in your teleology? A word, by the way, I would not use. A silly question I would never bother to ask. I would ask, perhaps, what color was the sky that day? I could paint it for you, but you saw it. I did not. Was it that lavender ash, that line you love so much? I'd ask you, that winter after, did you see my ghost hiding behind the sidewalk's drifts of snow? Drifts which were so quickly sullied, so quickly melted away, annulled like us by the asphalt's heat, the city's squalor? But the night before it all melted away, did you walk outside as the snow fell, see some form of purity there, find an empty side street, see it as a sort of diorama, some reincarnation in miniature of the fullness, fathoms deep, of Fifth Avenue, blizzarded years ago, carless, unpeopled, a white sea beneath us, a white canvas in front of us, the distance impenetrable. Yours a blizzard now of one. And oh darling, let's see, what have you not told them? So much, nearly all of it. Where to start? Perhaps one thing, something meaty that may stand in for the rest. The emaciated body of my aunt, my godmother, deathly ill, the shadow knocks, insistent on her door. I'm gone 2 weeks to say goodbye, you stay. Work, work. I return bereaved to find my plants, flowers dead. Leaf subsides to leaf. You in the doghouse, as they say, so why not company? You up the ante, finally a seed, let's get a puppy. At the shelter, you leave to take a call outside. Dealer's choice, you said, as you turned away. And then, and I can't stress this enough, who the fuck returns a puppy after 2 months? Allergies. That small animal is one of those things that makes a weed. Did you not see that? It was golden, for God's sakes. It might as well have been a metaphor. But, and this is critical, it was not a metaphor. It was a puppy, a golden, happy-go-lucky puppy that had grown attached to us and found his little spaces in the apartment. Allergies. What was it really? Did you just lack the bandwidth? Oh, how I hate the corporate speak you bring home with you, like the stench of smoke on a coat. Or was it, as I suspect, simple animal jealousy, that your head got scratched a little less, that sometimes you could not occupy the crook of my shoulder where you like to rest? Perhaps as simple as that. All of it, though, perhaps. And I acquiesced. The lavender turns to ash. Perhaps I am being over-sentimental about it all, but I thought you'd have tread more carefully with me. Maybe to you it was some silly thing, but I told you of what had happened to my first and only pet. Just a rabbit. Who would hold on to something so small, so long ago? That's what pets are for when we are young, you'd have said. To be companions, yes, but also to teach us about death. But you weren't there. Entrails strewn, blood splattered on the grass, the rabbit's head displayed in the hedge. The dogs had ripped it up to shreds for fun. They could not be kept in, our dogs. They were smart. They get out and hunt. They can't be blamed. All too human of them. But nonetheless, there it was, blood, guts, heads, brains, and I, only 7. That's innocence still at that age, innocence, witness to it. So long ago, but memories are in the blood and will not be let go. The yellow school bus on the curb, the doors open, a gaping maw. My screams, each bus window then filled with a face witnessing me. The bus driver standing now in the bus's crooked mouth, her face a sadness, as if she knew. So yes, us, and the puppy, freighted with meaning, a big fucking deal. Now, the unkindest cut of all. But do you really believe it was merely the soft touch of steel beneath my ribs when I was robbed? So close to home, that undid me, that like a needle opposite its nature unwound us, that it was not death by 1,000 cuts, and that you could offer precious metals in return, a shiny ring to stay me, to patch the threadbare fabric up. But I was ambivalent, conflicted, of course, all the counterweights we placed on the scales. The video you took of the flowers in my braids swaying as we walked in Central Park, flowers that you plucked before you knew I preferred if you didn't. So I did not protest. I took them in the spirit they were given. I wove them fully within me. I do admit that was a perfect day. And you told me later that was when you began to fall for me. There were, I admit, many perfect days, the early leaves of flower, and they all went on the scale. But why do the things that separate people one from the other have to be so much more concrete than those things that bind us up? Perfect days, yes, but what are they but images in my mind? It's just a braid of chestnut hair with 5 purple flowers in it. Our bare legs stretched out in front of us on the great lawn, greenly longing for a blue distance. You chasing your little niece around, playing at dad. On a roof in Brooklyn later that evening, watching the sunset. Prosaic things, utterly prosaic, made resonant only by the retrospective glance of love. But dead ants, dead plants, dead flowers, abandoned dogs, these things are concrete, corporeal, they can be touched, must be physically thrown out, each in their own way. Each of these things bleeds real misery, which stains. So I went back to the beginning to find us, to try to dig up enough, to get to yes, as they say. There's always more in the beginning, don't you think? Always more when it is the body that rules the universe. A beginning is a God and ours was good. A direct, unambiguous deity of one mind, the universe in its merest atoms buzzing simple, fucking simple Congress. Then you finally noticing the small things that, for instance, I often wore mismatched socks, which you came to realize was one of my idiosyncrasies, one of those idiosyncratic things that spurs along the slow and then sudden process of falling in love, which is like that old saw about bankruptcy that you once told me. That's how you fell for me. It happened slowly and then all at once. Like being bankrupted, a stark before and after, a categorical submission, in that we must admit to certain truths and give up something of ourselves, must restructure going forward the business of our lives. Metaphors fail, of course, you know this better than anyone. To be deficient is the nature of metaphor, but ours is in the trying. And the usual metaphors can do for love, there's really nothing new about it. And besides, you've already gussied up so much, allow us a brief reprieve. Simple things, the trite and true. So yes, we tended our gardens, I bent my limbs to you and you yours to me, but did our roots ever meet beneath? In bending towards each other we grew, lengthened our reach, a beautiful thing, but underneath? I could not say that I was certain, but is anyone really ever, really? Perhaps for some people there's no certainty to it, as they say, a matter of faith, of will, of a battle of wills, it turns out. Finally I had the courage to lay my hands firmly on the table and say my piece, try to make you understand. Come with me, I said. You love me, yes? Then what is there for you here without me? I thought you'd respect a good negotiation. I think you did, in fact. But not one to be outdone, you counter-offered. Marry me, you said. And outbid, I acquiesced. Yes, I said, yes. The compromise, you bought yourself some time. You probably thought I'd change my mind, change what I thought of in my mind as home. Love, you thought, an irrefutable argument. And of course, dead dog, bent penny, scuffed shoe, all of greater worth than life without love. Yes, life without love walks in the shadow of death. But all lives do. The irony of it all, it turned out neither of us had to choose. Should I stay or should I go? As I like to joke, the world is too much with us. Though then I had meant the royal we, humanity. But it turned out to be true. Too much with us. Tell me, what has it been like since? What has the shadow fulfilled? Nothing more than a mune, obscured, a starless night? But of course there's no such thing. It is in the nature of clouds that they shall pass. You know this. Strand told you this. One of your favorites, isn't it? You showed it to me in bed, remember, early on. Don't you love this, you said? Look, the lavender turns to ash, the clouds disappear. Where is she now? And where is that boy who stood for hours outside her house, learning too late that something is always about to happen, just at the moment it serves no purpose at all? Thank you.
All right.
The writer Donald Antrim once said to me that most artists stop generating work because they think they can do the work without getting hurt. It was a conversation we had years ago in passing, and given his tendency toward tragic comedy, I didn't think much of it. Until September, when Austin handed me her full-length manuscript, Hothouse Bloom, a novel that gives expression to a constellation of feelings and habits of mind that tend to resist articulation, ambivalence, apathy, a sense of defamiliarization. The narrator inherits an apple orchard, quits painting for reasons we are not entirely aware of, moves away from every reference point she has known and every person who has known her in turn, in order to not exactly become one with the land, but to rewire her consciousness to embody the land's temperament, to just exist on a cellular level, to not want. The narrator is set on avoiding the human compulsion to duplicate and complicate reality through acts of artistic representation. And yet, Hothouse Bloom is told in prose that is equal parts romantic, even baroque, and ruthless. It is a limpid novel about the constraints of identity and the urge to annihilate them. I happen to have a huge appetite for writing and reading about nothingness, but after that first read in September, I asked Austin to go back through the manuscript, to comb through it sentence by sentence, and infuse into it a subdued tension, a sense of atmospheric danger that could liberate her from the constraints of plot without losing the reader. That is a delicate concept to grasp, and to write with that level of attention requires steadfastness, courage, and the assured optimism of a tightrope walker. It is the line we walk when we understand that we cannot write honest work and not get hurt. We have to be willing to fail, to embrace a certain level of existential death. I knew what I was asking of her would be painful. She had spent a great deal of time completing and fine-tuning a finished manuscript draft, itself a tremendous act of sustained attention. And here I was asking her to go back and re-envision the project again. There was such an abundance of clarity and resilience in her work, such finely tuned music, that I had no doubt she would bounce back from the conversation and quickly and get on with it. She read everything I suggested with an eye of a detective, and then went back to her manuscript and got after her sentences without an ounce of preciousness, but with a great deal of respect for language's capaciousness. I knew then that she had the temperament to go the distance, to approach her art as a vocation, as most serious practitioners do. It is a gorgeous book, one that displays her courage, range, and commitment. And her work has already found its audience. She has placed it in the Massachusetts Review, the Florida Review, the Cincinnati Review, the Columbia Review, the Kenyon Review, Asymptote, and elsewhere, and has been highlighted by the Poetry Foundation. All good things. So please join me in congratulating her on walking that tightrope successfully and on winning the Sparks Prize in recognition of that very hard, very honest work.
Thank you so much, Azarine, and to everyone who's helped me with this manuscript. I feel really lucky to be leading this program with a wealth of very generous and brilliant mentors, peers, readers, and friends. So, that's right. I've selected 10 or 11 excerpts from this piece because I think it has a poetic logic as much as it has a narrative logic. And I think these excerpts will sort of give a sketch of one of the main sort of movements of the novel. So every time I flip through or drop a page, I'm skipping a chapter or two ahead. She was born for and was always seeking a world of immense gentleness. She was always trying to prolong the hours into all 60 of their discrete and waterlogged minutes, and to stretch the minutes out until the full arc of their 60 seconds, to blow the perception of a single moment up into infinitude. She wanted to wrap each one with the very heart of things, with the total capacity of human feeling, so that she could someday say she had lived a rich life full of affect. She was afraid to die, having planned out her whole life without having lived it. Yet she was always envying those to whom things simply happened. Conversely, her life was unflowing. Nothing simply happened to her. Something about this world had never seemed right to her. She wasn't sure what. Her life was aimless by every available yardstick. The others in her family had careers, adventures, heart-rending tragedies. She had had ambitions to paint, whatever that might entail. She lacked vision. And while deaths among them often passed consequenceless, her family rarely held funerals. No one knew each other. Like hawks, they soared and dropped alone. Her grandfather had left her the orchard like a hand serenely extended. It appeared as wood-carved fingers stretching down from the blue, waiting, a gigantic vague sketch of a hand, the way out. Fearful of breaking the spell of isolation and suffering another humiliation at the hands of another, she continued to marvel at the ranch from a distance, and to live alone. She watched how the ewes oriented themselves in the pastures, bending down their thick necks to graze or strolling so slowly from one spot to another to cross the field that it could take an entire day. If only I could live with such unconsciousness. She would need to experience the origin moment, to go back to the very beginning. Agriculture seemed to her like the defining moment of human history, the moment man distinguished himself from animal, and something within it would allow her to peer over the precipice of the human into the unconsciousness she craved. Then her happiness would expand frankly like the bold unfurling of a flag. Sometimes that unconsciousness scared her, looking out at all the blossoming trees, young birds taking off from branches, flower spiders immobile on the petal. It was something so large and complex you couldn't even see it in a single look. How could she turn that fear into deference? The orchard partly viewed. The branches forming vertical triangles between their rows, the almost insufferable brightness of the sun, which matured the apple buds, which exploded the flowers out of their pods. Not knowing what happened at the orchard at all moments, she could imagine it contained secret processes, like a mirage island always out of reach. Like within it was an ancient being with limbs weighed down by apples and by vines, fantastical things, invisible spindles, the forest of fruit, remember wonder that soothed her. To experience the origin moment, she would have to practice rebuilding the world. Physically and psychically, it was a daily task. After the beginning of humanity, she would be able to see the orchard like a primeval mammal, no farther back. Geologic scares of time, the very beginning, rocks and lightning, fire, space, a million years of rain, the gradual pounding of rock into dirt, everything that prefigured the incidental discovery of agriculture in the Nile and in the Fertile Crescent. One of those moments must have been the moment life became so unbearable. Whether it was human life or life itself, she didn't know. She found it necessary to search all along the timeline, back before life was death. Life could not be so unbearable at its core. Sometimes the reverse would happen. Mild, happy, sociable, the two of them would have an easy streak together as if briskly sailing in the same direction in the same wind. Their muscles slackened in the blurry sunlight. Trying to pass the time, she'd say something to Jan. "This tree's budding nicely, isn't it?" And Jan would simply hum back at her. She peeked at him through the branches of the tree, noticed the worried expression on his face, and realized Jan was probably thinking about his work. Was that it? So distracted. Why couldn't he talk about it in the orchard as easily as he could outside of it? His face on the other side of the row was half obscured by the brown trunk with its black veins and random branches, like a natural prison forming his face. He was hacking off an infected-looking limb. And as if peering into the wooden cage, Alessandra stared and tried to decipher his expression. Hopefully, if he wasn't able to talk about his work, and wasn't able to talk at all, he was experiencing something. She wanted him to admit it. She lowered her eyes and smiled to herself, feeling foolish. Finally, setting her hand to work again, hinging her pruning saw on a particularly stiff branch, and pretending to observe the angle of her cut, she asked with feigned casualness, "What's on your mind?" Jan looked at Alessandra, surprised, and always with some slight variation would say, "Oh, it's nothing," setting his ladder against a new tree. "Nothing much," holding onto a strong branch to steady himself. "Not much," pausing on the ground, his hand on the railings. "Nothing at all." And then he smiled. "Live a life of pure instinct," she accidentally said out loud. Jan seemed to flinch at her voice. He started breathing in a different way. She tried not to be embarrassed, hoped he registered it as the externalization of what she had been telling him psychically. She had half a mind to throw him to the ground, shove his face into the earth, force him into divine comprehension the way she had forced herself. Maybe he needed to feel the dirt on his face. But Jan's instinct said, "I'm bored." He squeezed her hand the almost sorry way one squeezes the hand of the terminally ill. She looked down at it, disgusted, remembering the liquid black flesh. But then she picked it up and took a sip. It was smooth and sour. A pleasurable sourness. It was this tartness. She had never really liked apples, not in a consumptive way. That thought struck her as funny. "Tastes all right, doesn't it?" he said. "If we order some plastic jugs, we could package and sell them through the winter. That way fewer of them would go to waste. Does that seem ethical?" He leaned forward, smiling, shrugging, rolling his eyes, like the two of them were in on some secret. "But doesn't it taste all right?" he said softly. "You always loved sweets, sweet tooth." She took another sip to hide her face from him. It did taste all right. "We could mull some too," he went on in his normal tone. The sip became a gulp. Her whole field of vision was of the brown red cider and the thick ring at the bottom of the glass. It was delicious. The flavor was fresh, sharp, and complex, despite the fruit it had come from. She had acclimated to the taste. Nothing seemed rotten about it. And as she lowered the glass, there was Jan's face again, watching her with that same intensity. She scooted back again. He reached out and took the half-drunk glass from her hand, the way one takes a glass from a child, slipping his fingers underneath hers. He set it by the pitcher on the desk. How much money I can make depends on the consumer. Consumer. Ha ha. Hunching over her chair like a cat, she squinted out at them. They either didn't see her or avoided her gaze. Two young farmers or workers. They were writing out their prices on the chalkboards beside the fruit. Fuji's? Come on. And what the hell is a cosmic crisp? The clock tower rang, rustic. She looked at her phone. Noon. She closed her eyes. She was ready. She wasn't an idiot. Signs like that commanded attention. Why else would people subject themselves to them? A hurried student walking through the market one day, on a day off from school, would see Pleasant Hill's cartoon sun smiling out from behind the poorly drawn hill, find it charming, think subconsciously how she loved the sunshine, how nice it was to be out in the daylight, and go over there and buy the Fuji's. Those were the kind of people who bought more produce than you could possibly eat in a week. But wasn't there something irresistibly quaint about a lone woman in a crate of apples, as though your mother had set them down before you on the kitchen table? Your mother doesn't come with signs. We all make compromises. But on her way back to the coop, she saw the door was open. In the dirt beside the chicken wire, 3 duck hens lay dead. They had been eviscerated and half-eaten by some animal. Their necks were all mangled, and in the hole of one's breast, she could see the faint rainbow of its organs, yellow, purple, and red. The white hens in their red bridal gowns. No, of course not. Jan's eyes were painted with the friendly look one reserves for acquaintances. They communicated nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That was truly a muscular experience. I'm really some art flexing. And now to the awards. So as Azari just referred, I am pleased to share that this year's Sparks Prize winner is indeed Austin Wohlers, and with the runner-up being Naima Mizeshu. And this year's judge was the novelist and memoirist Thierry, whose most recent book, Names for the Light, A Family History, was the winner of the 2018 Grey Wolf Press Nonfiction Prize, and you can buy that from Grey Wolf. And she is an escapee of our very own Bazaar Kiosk, and she teaches at Amherst. I am now pleased to also announce the recipient of the Hazel Award. So the Samuel and Mary Ann Hazel Poetry Award is given to the recipient whose work reflects Hazel's humanistic aesthetic. Wow, there's an interesting slash here. Humanistic aesthetics and ideals. And I love that, that's wonderful. Okay, the humanistic aesthetics and humanistic ideals and commitment to the poet's craft. It is selected by unanimous decision from the current poetry faculty, and it's based upon thesis, students' class performance, and contribution to the creative writing community and to the MFA program. So this year's Hazel Award winner is Mary Dwyer. The wooing of her lords and feasting on the shroud truly astonished us as a faculty. So well done. That is a big book. And finally, well, I mean, in impact and aesthetic ideals. And finally, it is my pleasure to announce the Mitchell Award. So the Mitchell Award is for distinguished achievement and contributions during residency for the MFA degree in Graduate Creative Writing Program. I am very pleased to share that this year the award will go to 2 recipients, and one is Naima Mizeshu for her service as a graduate representative on the Faculty Search Committee last year in AY 2021, and generally just for being an anchor of our community of writers. So thank you, Naima. You are a co-winner. And our other co-winner is Jillian Phanton. As co-winner, we recognize your service as a study hall tutor at the Westville instructional facility and all you have done to bring those writers into our community, even though they can't be here tonight, and as editor-in-chief of Revisions. So thank you, Jillian. And that is it. So warm congrats to everyone who is graduating this spring and summer. My deepest thanks to the family, friends, and also first-year cohort for supporting these writers as they have moved through our program with excellence and elan. Congratulations to all of us. Let's go eat some snacks. Yeah.